Engines roared like thunder, shaking the very foundations of a sleepy Pennsylvania town. 500 outlaw bikers descended upon a quiet, empty funeral for an ordinary, forgotten old man. Why would the most notorious gang on earth cross state lines for a suburban postman? The truth changes everything. Theodore Harrison lived a life so painfully mundane that his death barely registered as a whisper in the small, perpetually grey town of Oakhaven. For 42 years, Theodore had worked as a clerk for the United States Postal Service. He sorted letters, stamped packages, and went home at exactly 5:15 every single evening to eat a frozen dinner in front of a flickering television screen. He was a man composed entirely of beige habits and quiet routines. When Pastor Gregory called Elena Mitchell in Chicago to inform her that her father had passed away from a sudden heart failure, she did not collapse. She did not weep. She simply held the phone staring out the window at the bustling city traffic, feeling a hollow ache of obligation. Elena was 38, a successful architect, and she had not spoken to her father in nearly 7 years. There had been no explosive argument that drove them apart. There was no terrible abuse or shocking scandal. Instead, it was an insidious, suffocating apathy that had severed their bond. Theodore had been an emotionally invisible father. When Elena had starred in her high school play, Theodore sat in the back row staring blankly at the floor. When she married her husband, Bradley, Theodore had shown up in a cheap, ill-fitting suit, shaken Bradley's hand with a weak grip, and left before the cake was even cut. He was a ghost who occupied a physical body, a man who refused to engage with the world, or the daughter who had so desperately craved his affection. Now sitting in the suffocating formaldehyde-scented office of Harold Gable, the local funeral director, Elena felt a deep, twisting guilt about her lack of grief. "I'm so sorry for your loss, Mrs. Mitchell," Mr. Gable said, folding his manicured hands over his desk. "Theodore was, well, he was a very quiet gentleman. We expect a very small service. I've prepared our smallest parlor for tomorrow." "That's fine, Mr. Gable," Elena replied, her voice flat. "It will just be me, my husband Bradley, and the pastor. I doubt anyone else even knew he was alive. We just want to get this over with, to be perfectly honest." Bradley reached over and squeezed her hand. He knew the resentment Elena carried. She had spent a week clearing out Theodore's drab, single-story house. It was a depressing archaeological dig into a life unlived. There were no photo albums on the coffee table, no souvenirs from vacations, no hobbies. Just stacks of old newspapers, perfectly ironed slacks, and a pantry full of canned soup. The only anomaly in the entire house had been the heavy oak door at the end of the hallway leading to the basement. It was secured with 3 deadbolts. When Elena was a little girl, Theodore had explicitly forbidden her from ever going near it, claiming it housed an old, dangerous boiler. Over the weekend, Bradley had tried to force it open to finish the property assessment, but the solid wood wouldn't budge, and they couldn't find a key anywhere in Theodore's meager belongings. They eventually decided to leave it for the bank's contractors to deal with. "He left nothing behind, Bradley," Elena had whispered the night before the funeral, finally shedding a single frustrated tear in their hotel room. "He existed for 68 years, and he left absolutely no mark on this earth. It's pathetic. It's like he was hiding from life." The morning of the funeral broke with heavy, oppressive storm clouds. Freezing rain lashed against the stained glass windows of the Oakhaven Memorial Chapel. Inside, the atmosphere was as dismal as the weather. Theodore's affordable pine casket sat at the front of the room, flanked by 2 pitiful bouquets of wilted white lilies. Elena sat in the front pew wearing a simple black dress, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Bradley sat beside her, checking his watch, anxious to drive back to Chicago. Pastor Gregory stood at the pulpit, clearing his throat, opening a binder to a generic pre-written eulogy for a man he barely knew. "We gather here today to remember Theodore." The pastor began, his voice echoing off the empty wooden pews. "A man of quiet dignity, a man who faithfully served his community by ensuring the mail arrived on time, a man who—" The pastor stopped abruptly. Eleanor frowned, looking up. The stained glass windows were rattling. A low baritone vibration was trembling through the oak floorboards, traveling up through Elena's shoes. It sounded like an earthquake or a massive freight train barreling right through the town square. The low hum rapidly intensified into a deafening mechanical roar. The walls of the funeral parlor actually shook. Mr. Gable burst out of his back office, his face entirely drained of color. He rushed to the front doors, peered out through the frosted glass, and took a terrified step backward. "Mrs. Mitchell," Gable stammered, his hands visibly shaking. There is a situation outside. I'm going to lock the doors. Bradley, please call the police." "What's going on?" Elena demanded, standing up. "It's a gang," Gable choked out. "A very, very large gang." Elena did not listen to the funeral director. Driven by a sudden spike of adrenaline, she pushed past Mr. Gable and pulled open the heavy front doors of the chapel, stepping out onto the covered stone porch. Bradley rushed out right behind her, grabbing her arm. Nothing could have prepared her for the sight waiting on the streets of Oak Haven. The main avenue, usually desolate and quiet, was entirely blocked off. But it wasn't a riot. It was a highly coordinated, militaristic procession. Through the pouring rain, riding 2 by 2 in perfect disciplined formation, was a sea of massive, customized Harley-Davidson motorcycles. The chrome engines gleamed under the grey sky, spitting exhaust and roaring with a unified, terrifying power. There were dozens of them. No, Elena realized as the procession stretched over the horizon, there were hundreds of them. "My God," Bradley whispered, pulling Elena closer to him. They wore thick leather cuts over dark hoodies, completely unbothered by the freezing rain. On their backs was the unmistakable, terrifying insignia of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club. To make matters even more bizarre, the local police weren't stopping them. 2 Oak Haven patrol cars were slowly leading the procession, their lights flashing, escorting the outlaw bikers directly to the funeral home. The thunderous roar of the engines began to cut out one by one as the bikers parked in perfect synchronization along the curbs, across the lawns, and in the chapel parking lot. More than 500 towering, hardened men dismounted. They wore heavy steel-toed boots, thick chains, and their faces were weathered canvases of scars, heavy beards, and prison tattoos. Elena's heart hammered furiously against her ribs. She was terrified. Had her father owed them money? Had his mundane life been a cover for massive gambling debts? Were they here to collect, to desecrate his casket, to threaten her? The sea of bikers parted down the middle, making a wide, respectful path. Walking down the center was a giant of a man. He stood easily at 6'5", built like a freight train, with a thick grey beard and a deep, jagged scar running from his left temple down to his jawline. His leather vest was covered in patches, indicating high rank. A patch over his heart read, "President, Nomads." He stopped at the bottom of the porch stairs, looking up at Eleanor. His eyes were entirely hidden behind dark aviator sunglasses. Behind him, 500 outlaw bikers stood in total absolute silence. The only sound was the rain hitting the pavement and the ticking of cooling engines. "Are you Elena?" the giant asked. His voice was like grinding gravel, deep and commanding. Elena couldn't find her voice. She nodded slowly. "I'm Jackson O'Rourke. Most folks call me Bones," he said, taking off his sunglasses. His eyes, surprisingly, were bright, piercing blue, and they were red around the edges, as if he had been fighting back tears. "We're coming inside, Ma'am. We're here to pay our respects to the old man." Before Elena could protest, or Mr. Gable could demand they leave, Bones walked up the steps. The massive crowd of bikers followed. They didn't storm the building. They filed in with incredible reverence, removing their heavy helmets, wiping the mud from their boots on the welcome mat. They completely swallowed the interior of the funeral home. They lined the walls, filled the pews, and stood shoulder to shoulder all the way down the hallways. The sterile scent of formaldehyde was instantly replaced by the heavy, pungent smell of wet leather ozone tobacco and motor oil. Pastor Gregory had backed himself into a corner, clutching his Bible to his chest in pure terror. Bones ignored everyone. He walked straight down the center aisle, his heavy boots echoing like gunshots in the silent room. He stopped in front of Theodore's cheap pine casket. For a long, agonizing minute, the terrifying gang leader just stood there, staring down at the pale, lifeless face of the retired postal worker. Then Bones reached up and slowly unbuttoned his heavy leather cut. He slipped it off his massive shoulders. From an inside pocket, he pulled out a faded, blood-stained fabric patch. It was a military insignia, a Special Forces unit patch from decades ago. With a trembling hand, Bones placed the patch directly over Theodore's heart. To Elena's absolute shock, this terrifying, scarred giant of a man fell to his knees on the hardwood floor. He bowed his head, and a jagged sob tore from his throat. Behind him, 500 hardened outlaws simultaneously bowed their heads. Many of them raised a closed fist in the air. Sniffles and suppressed tears echoed through the room. Elena broke away from Bradley. She couldn't take the confusion anymore. She marched down the aisle, her fear entirely replaced by burning bewilderment. "Who are you people?" Elena demanded, her voice ringing out in the quiet chapel. "What is going on?" "My father was a mailman. He sat in a chair for 40 years and watched game shows. He didn't know you. You have the wrong funeral." Bones slowly stood up from his knees. He wiped his face with the back of his massive hand and turned to look at her. He studied her face with a strange, heartbreaking tenderness. "He wasn't a mailman, Elena," Bones said softly. "And he sure as hell didn't watch game shows for fun. He watched them to stay awake. Because when he closed his eyes, he was back in the jungle." Elena took a step back, her breath catching. "What are you talking about?" "Your father's real name wasn't just Theodore Harrison. To us, to the United States government, and to the shadows of the world, he was known as the Wraith." Bones reached into his jeans pocket. He pulled out a heavy, tarnished silver key on a thick chain. He held it out to her. Elena recognized the design of the key instantly. It matched the shape of the deadbolts on the heavy oak door at the end of her father's hallway, the basement door she had never been allowed to open. "He was a ghost, Elena." Bones continued stepping closer and pressing the cold silver key into her palm. "A ghost who saved every single man in this room from a nightmare you couldn't possibly imagine. He sacrificed his entire life, his sanity, and his relationship with you just to make sure those monsters never found out you existed. It's time you went into the basement, little girl. It's time you met your real father." The drive back to Theodore's modest single-story house felt like a surreal fever dream. Elena sat in the passenger seat of Bradley's sedan, clutching the heavy silver key in her trembling hands. The metal was cold, biting into her palm, an impossible artifact from a life she never knew existed. Behind them, a rolling thunderhead of 500 outlaw bikers followed in a disciplined, slow-moving column. The citizens of Oakhaven stood on their porches in stunned silence, watching the leather-clad army escort a grieving daughter back to her childhood home. Bones rode his massive custom Harley-Davidson directly in front of their car, serving as a terrifying vanguard. When they pulled into the driveway, the bikers did not swarm the property. Instead, they formed a massive silent perimeter around the perimeter of the lawn, standing shoulder to shoulder, their backs to the house arms crossed. They were standing guard. "I don't understand any of this," Bradley whispered, turning off the ignition. His knuckles were white from gripping the steering wheel. "Elena, this is insane. We should call the FBI." "No," Elena said, her voice surprisingly steady. The anger and resentment that had clouded her heart for a decade were rapidly burning away, replaced by an urgent, desperate need for the truth. "No police. He gave me the key. I need to know who my father really was." Elena stepped out into the freezing rain. Bones was waiting for her on the front porch. He towered over her, his scarred face grim, yet his blue eyes held a profound, protective warmth. He opened the front door, gesturing for Elena and Bradley to step inside. The house smelled exactly as it always had: stale coffee, old newspaper, and overwhelming mediocrity. It was a perfectly designed illusion. Bones led them down the narrow hallway, past the faded floral wallpaper, stopping at the heavy oak door at the very end. The door Elena had been terrified of since she was 5 years old. "Go ahead," Bones rumbled softly, stepping back. "He left it for you. Only you." Elena took a deep breath, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She slid the heavy silver key into the first deadbolt. It turned with a heavy, satisfying clack. She moved to the second, then the third. With trembling fingers, she gripped the brass handle and pushed. The door didn't just open, it glided on silent industrial steel hinges. Instead of a rickety wooden staircase leading to a damp, mouldy boiler room, Elena stared down at a staircase made of diamond plate steel, illuminated by harsh red tactical lighting. The air drifting up from the basement was not musty. It was climate-controlled, carrying the faint, sharp scent of gun oil and metallic ozone. Elena slowly descended, Bradley close behind her, and Bones bringing up the rear. When her foot hit the bottom step, motion sensors triggered a grid of brilliant white LED lights illuminating the true basement of Theodore Harrison. Elena gasped, clapping a hand over her mouth. Bradley uttered a quiet, stunned oath. The entire footprint of the house had been excavated and reinforced with thick, poured concrete, creating a subterranean bunker that rivaled a military command center. The walls were lined with towering, encrypted server racks, blinking with silent, methodical purpose. On the left wall, an extensive armory was meticulously organized custom-built sniper rifles, tactical shotguns, body armor, and crates of ammunition, all perfectly maintained and locked behind reinforced glass. But it was the back wall that brought Elena to her knees. It was a sprawling, chaotic web of intelligence. Dozens of corkboards were bolted to the concrete, covered in hundreds of photographs, maps of South America and Eastern Europe, shipping manifests, and intercepted bank transfers. Red string connected faces to locations, creating a massive, terrifying tapestry of global organized crime. In the center of the room sat a heavy steel desk. On top of it, perfectly centered, was a single manila envelope with the name Elena, written in Theodore's precise, blocky handwriting. "What is this place?" Bradley asked, spinning around in pure disbelief. "Was your father? Was he CIA? CIA is too loud, too bureaucratic." Bones said, stepping into the light of the bunker. He walked over to the armory, gazing at the weapons with a deep, nostalgic respect. Theodore was part of a phantom element, a black ops detachment, so deeply buried in the Pentagon's budget that not even the president knew their names. They called them the Wraiths. They were sent in when diplomacy failed, when the military couldn't risk an international incident, and when good men were left to die in the dark. Bones turned to Elena, his massive frame casting a long shadow across the concrete floor. In the winter of 1993, I wasn't a biker. Bones began his gravelly voice, dropping to a somber whisper. I was Gunnery Sergeant Jackson O'Rourke, Marine Force Recon. My squad was running a covert reconnaissance op, deep in the Darien Gap near the Colombian border. We were hunting the Vargas cartel, a syndicate that was moving weapons and human beings like cattle. But we were betrayed. Our coordinates were leaked by a corrupt politician. Bones looked down at his boots, the memories visibly tormenting him. They ambushed us, killed 3 of my boys on the spot. They dragged the rest of us into a jungle compound and threw us in bamboo cages. We were tortured for 3 weeks. We were broken, starving, and waiting for the bullet. The US government officially declared us KIA in a helicopter crash to cover their tracks. We were ghosts. Elena watched a single tear track down the giant's scarred cheek. But your father didn't listen to politicians. Bones continued looking back up. Theodore dropped into that jungle alone. No backup, no extraction team. Just one man and a suppressed rifle. He spent 2 days crawling through the mud, picking off the guards one by one like a phantom. He breached the compound, rigged their armory with C4, and blew the cartel to kingdom come. He cut us out of those cages and dragged my broken body 10 miles through a malarial swamp to a smuggler's airstrip. He saved my life, Elena. He saved all of us. But why the gang? Bradley interrupted, gesturing vaguely upward toward the 500 bikers outside. Why the Hells Angels? When we got back, the government scrubbed the mission. I was honorably discharged, but I was angry. I was lost. Bones explained, tapping the Nomad patch on his heavy leather vest. I formed my club with other discarded veterans. We lived on the fringes. But the Vargas cartel didn't forget what Theodore did. They put a multi-million-dollar bounty on his head. They sent assassins, hit squads, shadow operatives into the States to find the man who crippled their empire. Bones walked over to the intelligence boards, pointing a thick, scarred finger at a photograph of a ruthless-looking man with a neck tattoo. Theodore had to disappear. He took a fake name, took the most boring, invisible job he could find, sorting mail, and faded into suburbia. But he needed eyes and ears on the streets. He needed an army that operated outside the law, outside the system. That was us. For 20 years, my boys have been Theodore's underground intelligence network. We tracked the cartel's assassins. When they got too close to Oak Haven, we intercepted them. We kept your father's perimeter secure. But your father, he paid the ultimate price. He had to become a ghost to you. Elena stared at the envelope on the desk, her heart shattering into 1,000,000 jagged pieces. The apathy, the coldness, the missed birthdays, and the blank stares. It was all a devastating performance. Elena approached the heavy steel desk, as if the ground beneath it might give way. Her hands shook violently as she picked up the manila envelope. The paper felt heavy, burdened with decades of unsaid words. She broke the wax seal and pulled out a thick stack of lined yellow paper. Bradley stepped up beside her, wrapping a supportive arm around her waist. Bones respectfully turned his back, standing guard at the bottom of the steel staircase, giving them the illusion of privacy in the high-tech tomb. Elena began to read, "My dearest Elena, if you are reading this, it means my war is finally over, and I have lost the physical ability to protect you. It also means you have met Jackson, and you have seen the truth of the life I hid from you. I know you hate me. I have felt your resentment radiating from you for the last 2 decades, a cold, heavy weight that I carried with me every single day. I know I was a ghost. I know I sat in the back of the auditorium during your school play, staring at my shoes. I know I left your wedding before the cake was cut. I know I let you believe that I was an empty, apathetic man who cared more about frozen dinners than his own brilliant, beautiful daughter. Elena, you need to understand that every single act of indifference was an act of desperate, agonizing love. Elena choked back a sob, a tear slipping from her chin and splashing onto the yellow paper, blurring the blue ink. The men I hunted, the syndicate I dismantled to save Jackson's men, they were monsters. They did not play by the rules of war. They operated on vengeance. For 20 years, the Vargas syndicate had operatives searching for me. They had eyes everywhere. There was a man, a butcher named Alejandro Cruz, who lived 3 streets over from us for 5 years. He was a cartel scout waiting for me to make a mistake, waiting for me to show a weakness. If I had cheered for you at your play, if I had cried at your wedding, if I had hugged you in the front yard, they would have seen my heart, and they would have ripped it out by taking you. You were my only vulnerability, Elena. My coldness was the armor I forged to keep you invisible to them. I had to make them believe you meant nothing to me, so that you would mean nothing to them. I watched every moment of your life, my sweet girl. I just had to do it from the shadows. Elena dropped to her knees, clutching the letter to her chest. A primal, devastating wail escaped her lips. The grief she had failed to feel in the funeral director's office now crashed over her like a tidal wave. She had spent her entire adult life feeling unloved, feeling inadequate, wondering why her father didn't care. And all along he was sitting in a dark room, burying his own happiness, alive, enduring her hatred, just to keep a target off her back. Bradley knelt beside her, tears streaming down his own face, holding her tightly as she wept into his shoulder. "There's more, Elena," Bones said softly, not turning around. "Read the last page. You need to know how he died." Elena wiped her eyes, her hands trembling as she pulled the final page from the envelope. "By the time you read this, the doctors will have told you that my heart simply gave out. A quiet death for a quiet mailman. That is a lie I arranged with the coroner. 3 days ago, my network Jackson and his brave boys intercepted a communication. The final heir to the Vargas Empire, a ruthless killer named Hector Navarro, had finally located Oakhaven. He was mobilizing a strike team. They weren't just coming for me, Elena. They had found out about you. They were coming to Chicago. I could not let that happen. I could not let my past reach your doorstep. 2 nights ago, I left this house for the final time. I tracked Navarro to a safe house in Detroit. I did what I was trained to do. I eliminated the threat. The Vargas syndicate is dead. Every last remnant has been severed. You and Bradley are permanently entirely safe. But Navarro was a coward who liked chemistry. During the breach, I was exposed to an aerosolized nerve agent, a slow-acting cardiotoxin. There is no cure. I managed to drive back to Oakhaven. I walked down the hall, locked the deadbolts, and sat in my armchair in front of the television. I wanted to die in the mundane world I built for us, knowing that my final act was ensuring your future. I do not regret a single moment of the pain I endured, because you are alive. You are a brilliant architect. You have a good husband. You have a beautiful life. Live it, Eleanor. Live it without fear, and please, finally forgive the ghost who loved you from the dark. Forever, your protector, Dad. Eleanor let the paper fall to the concrete floor. She stared blankly at the wall of intelligence, at the red strings and the photographs. The magnitude of his sacrifice was incomprehensible. Theodore Harrison didn't die of a weak heart. His heart was the strongest, bravest thing on earth. He had engaged in a one-man war, suffered a lethal poisoning, and quietly driven himself home to die in a cheap recliner, so his daughter wouldn't have to face the monsters of the world. Bones finally turned around. The giant biker walked over his heavy boots, echoing in the bunker, and knelt in front of Elena. "Your father was the greatest man I ever knew." Bones whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "And now his watch is ended. But you listen to me, Elena. You are a Wraith's daughter. You are royalty to us. If you ever need anything, a flat tire changed, a leaky roof fixed, or an army at your back, you have 500 brothers waiting in the wind. You will never be alone." Bones stood up, came to rigid attention, and delivered a razor-sharp, flawless military salute to the empty steel desk. Above them, through the thick concrete ceiling, a sound began to build. It was faint at first, then grew into a massive earth-shaking rumble. The 500 Hell's Angels outside had started their engines. They were not leaving. They were revving their massive machines in unison, a mechanical, thunderous 21-gun salute that rattled the windows of the town and echoed all the way to the heavens. Elena stood up, leaning on Bradley. She looked around the bunker one last time. She wasn't looking at a tomb anymore. She was looking at a monument to a father's legendary love. She wiped the tears from her face, a fierce, unbreakable pride blooming in her chest, and walked up the steel stairs to face the roaring thunder. If this incredible true story of a father's hidden sacrifice and a biker gang's unspoken loyalty touched your heart, don't let Theodore's legacy stay in the shadows. Smash that like button to honor a real hero. Share this video with someone you love to remind them that true love is often silent. And don't forget to subscribe for more mind-blowing hidden stories from the real world. What would you do if you found this basement? Let us know in the comments below.